Jenna froze in the doorway. Strangers were touring her mother-in-law's living room. "This is our home," she hissed. "You can't just sell it." Martha, widowed, underestimated, and done asking, barely looked up. The realtor handed over the folder. Brian's voice cracked as he read. "You removed us from everything." Martha smiled. "Correction. I removed the mistake." "All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." The chapel smelled like lilies and lemon oil, too clean, too bright, like someone had scrubbed grief out of the air. Martha sat still in the front row, her spine a steel rod, hands clasped in her lap like a statue placed there for show. The mahogany casket to her left glinted in the filtered sunlight pouring through stained glass. People behind her whispered in that hushed funereal rhythm, too soft to hear, too sharp to ignore. Jenna's perfume announced her before her heels did, cool, sharp, metallic. She slid into the seat beside Martha, her black dress tailored within an inch of arrogance, no tear tracks on her cheek, no redness in her eyes, just flawless foundation and lipstick that didn't smudge when she leaned in. "You're next," she whispered. It was a breath, not a threat, almost kind. Almost. Martha didn't blink. Her gaze stayed forward, fixed on the photo atop the velvet-draped pedestal, a family portrait taken 3 years ago on the front lawn, before the frost had settled between them. Back when Brian had a real smile and Jenna still made the effort to look unsure of her place. Now Jenna owned every inch of space she walked into. Brian stepped up a moment later, holding a sweating glass of scotch. "You okay?" he asked Jenna, not even glancing at his mother. She took the drink with a demure smile. "Thanks, babe." He nodded, gave Martha a squeeze on the shoulder without making eye contact, and disappeared back into the crowd where someone was telling a story that started with, "Remember when they used to host those huge 4th of July barbecues?" Martha's fingers tightened against each other. The funeral director had set everything up just as requested, but the details grated against her nerves. The wrong hymn, the wrong flowers, the fact that Jenna had chosen the urn without even asking. Smooth black marble, modern, impersonal, not the rustic wood her husband would have wanted. He hated black anything. In the picture he was laughing, caught mid-chuckle with his arm around Brian and his hand on Martha's shoulder. Jenna stood next to them, smiling that early Jenna smile, the one that hadn't yet learned how to flatten into sarcasm. They'd stood in that yard for 20 minutes trying to get the lighting right. That house, that yard, that family, gone. Now all that remained was this quiet hush of obligation. People she didn't know pressing cold hands into hers. People saying, he was a good man, like that was a complete thought. He had been a good man, but not a perfect one. The image flickered behind her eyes. How he'd started spending more time with Brian after retirement. How Jenna had gotten more involved in managing the household when Martha's knees began to ache. How paperwork went missing. How conversations with her husband started ending in silences that weren't theirs. Jenna touched her arm lightly, a gesture no one would question. "You look pale. Maybe it's time to start letting go." Martha turned to her finally. Their eyes met. "I have," she said. "You'll see." Jenna's expression faltered for a fraction of a second before smoothing back into that practiced concern. Martha returned her gaze to the casket. Not one tear had fallen, not because she wasn't sad, but because grief had to stand in line behind strategy. Her husband's death had ended one kind of life. Jenna just tried to end the other. And failed. The chapel doors creaked open as the pastor stepped in, signaling it was time to begin. People shifted, sniffled, stood. Martha rose with them, every inch of her trembling with things she wasn't ready to say. Jenna stepped back, smile polite, drink empty. As the opening hymn filled the room, Martha caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the urn's surface. Wrinkled, sure. Faded, maybe. But not gone. Not yet. She clasped her hands again, not in prayer, but in precision. The kind of focus that came from years of being underestimated. Because if Jenna thought she'd already won, she hadn't read the fine print. Martha didn't sleep that night. Not deeply. The sheets beside her were cold, tucked too tight. The house had a new echo now. Not from emptiness, but from trespass. Laughter drifted up the staircase around midnight, thin and jagged like broken glass in a breeze. She sat up slowly, knees aching. The hallway was dark, but not quiet. Downstairs, she heard Brian's voice, booming, boyish. He was laughing too loud for someone who'd buried his father 12 hours ago. Jenna's voice followed, light and amused. "I'm just saying, if we knock out the wall between the den and the back room, it could be a proper office, or nursery. Depending." Silence. Then clinking glasses. "The masters finally got good light in the mornings now. I think it's because we cleared out all those heavy drapes. Feels like our space now." Martha leaned against the banister and closed her eyes. Her hand trembled, not from age this time, but from pressure. Her husband's scent was still in the closet, still caught in the folds of his jackets. And yet Jenna was already drawing blueprints over his grave. She moved slowly back into the bedroom, opened the nightstand, and pulled out her old cell phone, the one she rarely used unless traveling. She swiped through the empty photo roll, opened the voice recorder app, and tapped it on. Then, carefully, she slid the phone into her robe pocket and stepped back out into the hallway. Jenna's voice carried up again. "We'll replace the dining set, something sleeker. All this oak is, well, it's very Martha." Another bout of laughter. Martha turned her face toward the dark. No tears, just that same dry, vibrating hum in her chest that had been building since the memorial. She walked to the far end of the hall, where the office still held the things nobody thought to touch, where the real memories lived. Files, ledgers, letters in her late husband's hand. She opened the drawer marked "Old Clients, East Coast," and dug beneath the folders until her fingers found what they were looking for: a leather-bound address book, the kind nobody used anymore. Her thumb found the worn tab: Parker, Daniel. Daniel Parker had been her husband's business partner for almost 20 years. She hadn't spoken to him since his retirement 6 years back, but she remembered his voice: blunt, dry, loyal. She dialed. "Dan," she said when he answered, groggy. "It's Martha. I need to ask you something. Discreet." A pause. "Is this about the trust?" That one word made her skin tighten. They met 2 days later at a little breakfast diner off Route 43. He looked older, but sharper than she remembered. He slid into the booth with 2 coffees already ordered. No pleasantries. "You know there's a clause, right?" he asked. "I suspected. He told me, quietly, after his last hospital visit. Said he was worried about the pressure Brian was under. Didn't like how Jenna always seemed to be nearby when they talked finances." Martha's hand curled around the mug. Daniel leaned in, voice low. "He changed the language in the trust. It doesn't freeze until you pass, Martha. It pivots. You're the central node now. The board doesn't get control unless you forfeit." Martha exhaled slowly. "He never told me." Maybe he thought he didn't have to. When she got home, the house smelled like takeout and cheap candles. Laughter again. Somewhere, Jenna's voice snapped, "Well, she better get used to the changes." Martha walked straight to the garage, where the filing cabinet still sat beneath dusty drop cloths. She retrieved the folder labeled Estate Council, Briar and Lantham. Then she went to the living room, sat with the folder on her lap, and looked across the room at the woman who'd whispered death in her ear. Jenna caught her gaze, eyes narrowing. "Everything okay?" Martha smiled. "Oh yes," she said softly, "just making room." Later that night, Martha opened her laptop in bed and booked a consultation with a private estate attorney, not the family one. A new one. Quiet. Reputable. Out of town. She set the recorder beside her and hit stop. 22 minutes of audio. Laughter. Plans. Mockery. She hit save, labeled it Blueprints for Grief.mp3. Then she lay back on her pillow, hands folded over her stomach. Downstairs, the silence returned. But in her ears, thunder had begun. The smell of burnt toast jolted Martha back from a memory so vivid she could still feel the pen in her hand. 1992. A humid spring morning. She and her husband stood in the entryway of the freshly built house. No furniture, no curtains, just raw possibility. Brian, 15 and gangly, had run up the stairs yelling something about claiming the room with the biggest window. Her husband had wrapped an arm around her waist, handed her the manila folder with a boyish grin, and said, "It's yours first. Always will be." Martha had signed her name in bold ink. Primary owner. Deed in her full legal name. No hyphen, no confusion. The day had felt sacred. Earned. Now the kitchen was full of Jenna's favorite citrus-scented cleaner and furniture catalogs stacked where cookbooks used to sit. The breakfast table had been replaced with a narrow glass island. The toaster was new, sleek, overpriced, and terrible at its job. Jenna hovered near the fridge, humming as she poured almond milk into her coffee. She didn't acknowledge Martha's presence until she set down her mug. "We were thinking of donating that old sideboard in the dining room. Freshen things up a little." Martha folded the newspaper. "That was your father-in-law's grandmother's," Jenna shrugged. "It's very heavy. The lines are dated, and there's a tax deduction for antique donations if we file it correctly. I'll just handle it with the rest of the update stuff." She turned and walked out before Martha could respond, already texting someone. Martha sat in silence for a moment, letting the clink of Jenna's coffee spoon settle into her bones like sleet. Then she rose slowly, went into the front study, and pulled out the fireproof lockbox behind the bookshelf. The deed was still there. She held the paper gently, careful not to crease it. Her name, Martha Eleanor Whitaker, was listed at the top, sole primary. Her husband's name appeared as co-owner, added 6 months later in a notarized amendment. But nowhere was Brian or Jenna. She stared at the paper until the letters blurred. Later that morning, she took her coffee on the front porch, where the hydrangeas were starting to wilt. Her phone was open on her lap, real estate agency websites glowing in soft blues and whites. She scrolled slowly, studying bios. She wasn't looking for flashy. She was looking for quiet competence. One listing caught her eye. Deborah Kilpatrick, specialty, senior sellers, transition services, confidential listings available. Perfect. She tapped the number, saved it under library volunteer. Inside, the dishwasher clattered to a stop. Jenna's voice carried through the screen door. "Brian, can we just toss the rocker on the curb?" She hasn't used it in years. Martha stood, walked back in, and leaned lightly against the doorframe. "If you're tossing things," she said pleasantly, "let me handle the paperwork. Some of it still needs to be logged for estate purposes." Jenna blinked at her, visibly recalculating. "Oh, sure, that's responsible." Martha smiled as if she'd accepted a compliment. Brian walked in, rubbing his eyes, still in joggers and a hoodie. "What's going on?" "Just streamlining," Jenna said quickly, looping an arm through his, "making this place feel like home." Martha looked at her son. At the stubble, the soft middle, the man who'd once cried when his goldfish died. His eyes were distant now, polite, trained. "Don't get too ahead of yourselves," Martha said gently. "The walls may have ears." Jenna laughed too loudly. "Oh, Martha, you make it sound like a conspiracy." She left the room, dragging Brian with her. Martha waited until the footsteps faded, then pulled her phone from her pocket and opened a new folder titled Property Transition. She uploaded a photo of the deed, then another of the antique sideboard. She bookmarked the tax code reference for donations and opened a blank spreadsheet. Line by line, she began to list every item in the house with a market value, and every item Jenna had insulted or dismissed in the past 6 months. By the time the clock struck 11, she had a document titled Suggested Inventory for Immediate Liquidation.pdf. She closed the laptop, stretched her fingers, and rose to refill her coffee. As she passed the hallway mirror, she paused. The reflection looked back at her, not weak, not grieving, strategic, sharp, real. She tucked her phone back in her pocket just as a new email pinged. Subject, estate listing, private consultation request confirmed. The reply to line, Deborah K., confidential real estate services, and beneath it, a quote, "We sell more than homes. We reclaim peace." Martha smiled, stepped into the kitchen, and started measuring the sideboard. The smell of rosemary and seared lamb filled the house, an illusion of warmth that didn't reach the people inside it. Martha stood at the stove in a black blouse and an apron Jenna had picked out. It said, "Kiss the Cook," in a faux playful font that made Martha want to burn it along with the rosemary sprigs. Jenna flitted between the dining room and kitchen like the hostess of a lifestyle segment, her voice an octave too high, too performative. Brian hovered nearby, trying to be helpful, but mostly sipping wine and staying out of the line of fire. "She's just stressed," he'd told Martha earlier, when she'd asked if Jenna really expected her to cook for 10 people 3 weeks after burying her husband. "It's her way of coping. You always said she needed structure." Martha had said nothing, not aloud. Now she stirred the sauce and glanced at her phone propped against the backsplash, screen dim but microphone active. Every sentence, every aside, every sigh, it was all being captured. Jenna stepped into the kitchen and clapped her hands once, too brightly. 5 minutes. Can we plate the salad, Martha?" Martha nodded, moving methodically. Jenna leaned over to adjust the parsley garnish like it mattered. "We're doing lemon cake for dessert," she said offhandedly. "Hope that works for you." "It's what I made for his 60th birthday," Martha said. Jenna paused, blinked. "Oh," and walked out. The guests arrived at 6 sharp, some from Brian's work, some neighbors Jenna liked more. Then she led on. They came with wine, compliments, and slightly too curious glances toward Martha. She became the built-in feature no one acknowledged, like antique molding that clashed with the modern fixtures. Dinner began with Jenna giving a little toast. "To new beginnings. And the people who help build the next chapter." Brian raised his glass like a man who had memorized the script. Martha brought out the lamb, then the asparagus, then the rolls. No one thanked her. The wine flowed fast, and the conversation turned faster, renovation ideas, startup gossip, and a few veiled remarks about the generational shift in wealth. Laughter came too easily. Comfort came at Martha's expense. One guest, a woman in her mid-40s with short silver hair and clean-cut features, leaned toward Jenna. "So this place is gorgeous. Did you two just inherit it, or—" Jenna didn't hesitate. "It's ours now, finally. Took a while to update things, but we've really made it a home." Martha, standing just behind them with the water pitcher, blinked once, then poured. The woman's eyes flicked toward her. Not pity, not discomfort. Something sharper. Later, when dessert plates were scraped and guests began gathering their things, that same woman found Martha by the kitchen sink. Her voice was low, even, precise. "You made the lamb?" she asked. Martha nodded. "And the cake?" "Well," the woman said, slipping a small cream-colored card onto the counter beside the sponge, "you cook like someone who doesn't give up. That's rare." Martha looked down. "Claire Evers, legal consultant. Property and estate integrity discretion is our default." Claire gave a small smile. "You look like someone who's had enough." Then she walked out the back door with the others. No coat, no goodbye. Martha stood still for a long moment, the card cool in her hand. Jenna came in moments later, wine-drunk and radiant. "Did you see how they reacted to the dining room? I told you those chairs were hideous, but now it finally feels like us." Martha turned toward her, the kitchen warm and bright behind her, her husband's photo still barely visible on the far wall, half obscured by Jenna's new decor. "Oh, I saw," she said softly. "More than you think." Jenna, oblivious, grinned and disappeared into the hallway calling for Brian. Martha rinsed the sponge, folded the towel, and slid the card into her robe pocket next to her phone. She dried her hands carefully, one finger at a time. Then she pulled out her phone, tapped the recorder off, and stared at the file name. Dinner. Entitlements.mp3. She backed it up to cloud storage, and then, for the first time in weeks, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat in the darkened living room, watching the reflection of herself in the glass patio doors. Older, yes, but not finished. Not even close. Outside, the wind kicked up. Inside, Claire's card burned cold in her pocket. The attic still smelled like cedar and old winters. Martha knelt beside the storage chest that had once held Christmas decorations, tax files, and half-used address labels from the early 2000s. Her knees cracked as she shifted, the late afternoon sun slicing through the attic vent in sharp gold lines. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, exactly, only that something was here. Something Claire had nudged awake. The card still lived in her nightstand. 2 words haunted her: integrity, discretion. And that tone in Claire's voice, the one that didn't ask questions because it already knew the answers. She pushed aside a box marked 1998 Mortgage Refinances and found a thin black folder, rubber-banded shut. Her husband's old handwriting graced the corner. Revised, post-marital, 2009. Her throat tightened. She unhooked the band, unfolded the papers inside, and began to read. 3 pages in, she found it. Addendum to Post-Nuptial Agreement, January 12, 2009. In acknowledgement of primary contributions made toward the acquisition and maintenance of the property located at 114 Grantley Avenue, all ownership rights, including title, equity, and transfer privileges, are hereby designated exclusively to Martha Eleanor Whitaker, signed by him, notarized, witnessed. She sat back on her heels, stunned. Not shared. Not split. Heron. All this time, she'd remembered the title under her name. But this was more than that. This was a lock, a wall, a weapon Jenna had no idea existed. Martha folded the documents neatly and stood, every joint groaning in protest. She walked down the stairs with the folder against her chest like a shield. In the kitchen, Jenna's voice floated from the Bluetooth speaker as she narrated an Instagram story. Something about hosting on a widow's budget. Martha didn't pause. She walked straight past the noise and into the den, opened her laptop, pulled up Claire's email address. Subject, document found, urgent review requested. She attached a PDF scan of the post-nup, added a brief note, and hit send. Then she reached for her purse and pulled out her bank. Logins. It was time. She began at the smallest, an online-only savings account she'd used for birthday gifts and charity donations. Then the old mutual fund tied to her retirement from the local library board. One by one, she revoked Brian's read-only access, deleted Jenna's name from the emergency contact lines, and replaced everything with a number no one else had. Her number, the one tied to the burner phone she'd purchased last week in a strip mall off Route 19. Cash only, registered under Eleanor M. Whitman. By nightfall, her digital footprints were swept clean. Only one name sat next to hers on any financial documentation, Claire's firm, marked Legal Executor Standby. That night, she slipped out in her coat and drove 20 minutes to the post office in the next town over. She rented a P.O. box under her maiden name, then picked up a small lockbox and a roll of packing tape. On the way home, she stopped by a drugstore and bought another prepaid SIM, just in case. She returned to the house to find Jenna in the living room, wineglass in hand, curled up under a faux fur throw like a woman who'd just conquered something. "I was thinking," Jenna said without looking up, "we could replace the study carpet with hardwood. Makes it feel more open." Martha removed her gloves. "Maybe. I can show you some Pinterest boards tomorrow." "I'm out for most of the day," Martha said simply. "Errands." Jenna nodded, too tipsy to press. Upstairs, Martha opened her laptop again. Claire had replied, subject, confirmed, "You're airtight." One line below that. "You're not just protected, Martha. You're empowered. Let me know when you're ready to take the next step." Martha stared at the screen, then closed it gently. Her reflection hovered for a moment on the darkened screen, calm, sharp-eyed, and carrying a secret weight she no longer feared. She opened the desk drawer, placed the original post-nup inside a new envelope, and sealed it with 3 strips of tape. Then, on the front, she wrote one word in bold black ink, "Final," and beneath that, a return address, her new P.O. box number. Downstairs, Jenna's laugh rang out. Martha didn't flinch. She just opened the drawer again and started writing out a checklist labeled Stage 2, Displacement. It started with the keys. Martha left them in the fridge next to the almond milk, twice. Once on purpose, once for effect. Jenna found them both times. The second time, she called up the stairs in that falsely concerned voice Martha had come to expect. "Hey, Marth, you okay?" You left the car keys in with the produce. Martha stepped out of her room slowly, blinking like she'd just woken up from a nap. Did I? Oh, I must have been distracted. Jenna smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You sure you're getting enough sleep? I think so, Martha said softly, watching her reaction. I've been feeling a little fuzzy lately. Jenna didn't ask more. She just turned back toward the kitchen with the keys dangling loosely in her hand, and later that evening, Martha heard her whispering to Brian in the pantry. She's slipping, Jenna said. We need to keep an eye on her before something dangerous happens. Martha slipped her phone closer, voice memo app already rolling. Every syllable was crystal clear. By the end of the week, Jenna had bought a soft leather notebook. It lived on the edge of the breakfast bar next to a jar of pens. Martha saw the words, memory log, written on the cover in Jenna's tight, slanted handwriting. She played the part well. She oversalted the soup one night, left the laundry in the washer for 2 full days, walked into the dining room and paused, mid-sentence, staring out the window as if she'd forgotten why she came in at all. Jenna began circling things in the notebook. Martha saw dates, notes, even a page titled Concerning Patterns. Brian took a different approach. He texted Martha articles about aging gracefully and memory supplements. One evening, he opened his laptop across from her at the kitchen table and casually asked, "Have you ever looked into assisted living communities?" Martha looked up from her crossword. "Why would I?" "No reason," he said too quickly. "Just curious. In case, you know." For the future, Martha tapped her pen against the paper, smiling faintly. "Let me know what you find." That night, she uploaded 4 new recordings to the secure drive Claire had set up for her. She labeled them clearly, Gaslighting 1 to 4. The next morning, she called Nancy. Nancy Worthington had been her neighbor and friend for 30 years. Before the neighborhood became Jenna's curated project, a retired notary with a sharp memory and a sharper tongue, Nancy picked up on the first ring. "Martha," she said, no pleasantries, "you sound ready." "I need you to be on standby," Martha said. "Something official. Soon. I've got my stamp and my time, just say when." "Soon," Martha whispered. She hung up and stared at the phone for a moment before pulling out a manila folder from her drawer, Stage 2, Displacement. Inside was the postnup, the property inventory, and a growing stack of notarization templates Claire had forwarded. She filed it under a new subfolder titled Cognitive Strategy. That evening, Martha forgot to turn off the stovetop after boiling water for tea. The water hissed dry for nearly 10 minutes before Jenna noticed. "Jesus, Martha," she yelled, rushing to twist the knob. "You could have set the whole house on fire." "I'm so sorry," Martha said, eyes wide, voice thin with apology. "I was just thinking about, I don't even remember now." Brian came downstairs in sweatpants, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "That's the 3rd weird thing this week." "4th," Jenna corrected, reaching for her notebook. "The sideboard incident counts." Brian frowned. "I think we should talk to a lawyer, just to get things in place, in case Martha pretended not to hear." She went to bed early that night, curled beneath the quilt she and her husband had bought in Vermont the year before Brian left for college. She pulled it tight, let the weight of it press into her chest like armor. The notebook downstairs might have had her name on the cover, but the documents in her lockbox told a very different story, a stronger one. At 2:14 a.m., she woke up and opened her email. From Claire Evers. Subject, Draft Power of Attorney Request. Received. Martha scrolled down. Claire had written, "They'll ask for it soon. Beat them to it, with a version they'll never see coming." Martha smiled into the blue glow of the screen and began typing her reply. Subject, let's begin. The house was quiet, mid-morning quiet, weekday quiet, the kind of hush that made Martha's pulse feel too loud. Sunlight slanted through the blinds in her study, dust specks dancing in gold as she opened the folder marked Stage 3. One by one, she fed documents into the flatbed scanner. The updated will, the notarized postnup, the trust amendment, and Claire's draft of the power of attorney, one that granted Martha full retention of cognitive authority with legal protections baked into every line. Each scan beeped softly. Confirmed, backed up. She saved everything to an encrypted drive hidden behind a meaningless file name, water meter readings 2023.xlsx, and uploaded it to the cloud server Claire had provided. Double key access. No one but Martha and Claire could reach it, even if Jenna threw the laptop off a bridge. When the final document scanned, she closed the lid and exhaled. Then she pulled out her phone and typed a brief message to Claire. All uploaded. Lock it. Claire replied with a padlock emoji and the words, already bricked from external trace. You're invisible. Next, Martha made her way to the hall closet and retrieved the small black box her husband used to keep spare house keys, old passports, and extra bolts for the safe. She pulled out the rusted ring of keys, slid on her gloves, and knelt beside the floor safe beneath the coat hooks. She changed the manual lock code, slowly, carefully, to a new sequence known only to her. Then she changed the key slot lock altogether. She tossed the old key into a grocery bag and tucked it beneath the sink with the potato peels and coffee grinds. The garbage truck would come at noon. No trace. By lunchtime, she had sealed every legal back door they might try to pry open. At 2 p.m., she wandered into the living room in her robe and slippers, rubbing her temples. Brian was on the couch, phone in hand, earbuds in. "I'm not feeling well," she said softly. He didn't look up, just waved a distracted hand. "Probably stress. You've had a lot going on. Take a nap." She stood there for a beat longer, just enough for the absence of concern to register fully in her bones. "Right," she murmured. "A nap." He nodded without listening. That evening, the house turned into a celebration. Jenna's birthday, 38, though she claimed 35 on every form that didn't require a birth certificate. Friends poured in wearing soft cashmere and louder laughs. There were candles in every room, the smell of coconut lime diffusers battling with red wine and sugared vanilla from a bakery cake. Martha stayed invisible in her own kitchen, quietly managing the wine chillers, while Jenna played hostess like a woman auditioning for a life she hadn't earned. At dinner, Jenna lifted a glass of Prosecco and declared, "To new eras and new entitlements!" Laughter followed. One of her friends, a sleek brunette with champagne teeth, grinned and leaned over her shoulder. "You've got the housewife life now, minus the boring husband part." Jenna giggled, soaking it in like bath water. Brian chuckled too, eyes glazed, already a glass too deep. Martha stood in the shadow of the hallway arch, recorder active in her coat pocket, face unreadable. She took note of each guest, each chuckle, each comment. She noticed who looked uneasy, who looked smug, who scanned the room and saw nothing out of place. Jenna caught her gaze just once, halfway through dessert, over the rim of her third glass. Something flickered there. Suspicion? Victory? Fear? It vanished too quickly to catch. Martha raised her glass faintly and turned away. Later, she sat alone on the back porch while the guests shrieked over charades in the living room. Her recorder was full. Her hands were steady. From her phone, she tapped open Claire's most recent email, the subject line blinking like a low flame. "Your next move. Timing is prime." Martha smiled faintly. She scrolled down to the bottom of the message. A single sentence waited there. "How ready are you to let go of the house?" Martha looked through the porch screen at the home she'd once protected like a heartbeat. Her thumb hovered over the reply button. Then she tapped, "Show me the buyer." The pen clicked once in Martha's hand, then again. Then silence. She sat in Claire's office, the conference table wide and bare except for the mountain of documents between them. Real estate agreements, power of attorney confirmations, wire transfer protocols, and at the top, the property transfer authorization. Claire tapped the signature line with her fountain pen. "The title's in your name. The trust backs you. All parties, except the ones sipping rosé in your dining room, are aware and aligned." Martha looked down at the form, the numbers exact and clear. Then she signed. Her name, written steady as stone. Claire nodded. "That's it. The house is sold." Martha exhaled through her nose. "They'll be out of town this Sunday, right?" Claire pulled up a text chain. "Weekend retreat in Asheville." Jenna posted it publicly. "Manifestation getaway." Couldn't have scripted it better. Martha chuckled once, dry, low. Then she reached into her purse and handed Claire a small sealed envelope. "What's this?" "A donation form," Martha said. "For the buyer, the kitchen remodel. I want them to keep the new appliances. Jenna spent a fortune picking them. Might as well go to someone who will actually use the space to heal something." Claire smiled. "They're going to be thrilled. That shelter's been on a wait list for 2 years. You just gave them a future." "Good," Martha said. "I'm done feeding ghosts." By Thursday, the utility companies were rerouted. The gas would be off by Sunday night, cable and internet by Monday morning. Claire's office had coordinated every inch of the transition, right down to a security escort to oversee the property handoff. On Friday evening, Martha packed slowly, choosing only what mattered: the cedar chest, a few framed photos, her husband's reading glasses, the lockbox. The rest she labeled DONATE. She left her room last, pausing in the doorway to take one final glance. The walls were still painted in the soft green her husband had loved. Sage, not olive, he always said. The only room in the house Jenna hadn't touched. She walked over to Brian's room. He and Jenna wouldn't be back until late Sunday night. The shelves were dusty, laundry left in a corner. She pulled open the sock drawer, lifted a stack of balled-up athletic pairs, and tucked a manila envelope beneath them. Inside, the updated will, the notarized trust reallocation, a copy of the deed, dated and sealed, a note clipped to the top that read, "You had time, you had choices, you had me." She closed the drawer. Sunday came fast. At 11 a.m., the realtor arrived in a navy pantsuit and running shoes. "Buyers are pulling up now," she said cheerfully, handing Martha a copy of the final schedule. "You ready?" Martha nodded, smoothing the lapel of her coat. "Let's welcome them home." 3 cars pulled into the drive, 2 sedans, 1 van. Out stepped 3 women, 2 with clipboards, 1 with a toddler on her hip and eyes like bruises. They took in the house with cautious reverence. Martha stood just inside the threshold, smiling. "It's all yours. Take your time." One of them, a tall woman with silver hoops and sneakers worn thin at the soles, stepped forward and extended her hand. "Thank you. This place is more than we hoped for." "It's yours to restore," Martha said. "Every room, every inch." As the realtor led the group room by room, Martha walked through the kitchen one last time. Her lemon zester still hung from the pegboard. She left it. Before she stepped outside, she turned back and whispered into the empty living room, "Goodbye, love. We did what we could." She didn't cry. Instead, she climbed into Claire's car and watched as the front door closed behind the realtor and the new caretakers. They didn't know yet what battles had been fought here, and they didn't need to. Halfway down the street, Claire glanced over. "You okay?" Martha nodded. "Relieved." Claire hesitated, then said, "You know it's going to hit them like a brick wall." "I'm counting on it," Martha said. "I just won't be there to sweep up the dust." They turned the corner, the house vanishing from the rearview mirror. Back inside Brian's sock drawer, tucked under the legal documents, was a second note Jenna would find first. Manifest that. The sound of gravel crunching in the driveway sent a ripple through the foyer. Martha didn't turn. She was already standing by the staircase, clipboard in hand, calmly checking boxes beside the realtor as a pair of buyers admired the crown molding. Through the sidelight window, she watched Jenna's SUV jolt to a stop. Brian got out first, looking annoyed. Jenna emerged a second later, still in her retreat sweatshirt. Make space, take space, her hair up in a messy bun that didn't survive the 2-hour drive home. "What the hell?" Jenna muttered. Brian's voice came next. "Are those people?" They stormed toward the porch, confusion hardening into suspicion with every step. Inside, one of the nonprofit women adjusted the toddler's jacket near the front door. Another guest admired the kitchen's marble backsplash. The third stood at the fireplace, whispering to the realtor. Then the front door burst open. Jenna's voice was shrill from the first syllable. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" The room went still. Martha turned slowly, folding the clipboard against her chest. "Hi, Jenna," she said, her voice calm and even. "Welcome back." Jenna blinked at the buyers. "Why are strangers walking through my house?" Martha glanced at the realtor, who stepped forward and extended a polite but firm smile. Ms. Whitaker is the listed seller. You are… Brian pushed past Jenna. This is a mistake, he said, his voice low, breath catching. Mom, what is this? This is an open house, Martha replied. Your guest just arrived a little early. Jenna laughed, high and cracked. You can't do this. You can't sell the house. Martha nodded once toward the realtor. Show them the file. The agent stepped forward and handed Jenna a slim blue folder, legal-grade paper inside, printed clean and official. Jenna tore it open, eyes scanning too fast to grasp anything. This isn't real. Brian yanked it from her hands, reading slower. His jaw dropped. You changed the deed. No, Martha said. Your father did. I just finalized what was already mine. Jenna turned on her. This is a setup, a con. You forged something. The realtor interrupted. All documents have been verified through Breyer and Lantham. Independent review, court filing, notarization chain. Everything was above board. Jenna's face turned a shade Martha hadn't seen before, somewhere between panic and betrayal. Then came the scream. It wasn't loud. It was sharp, piercing, like glass breaking across the history of every dinner party, every helpful suggestion, every insult disguised as advice. The guests froze. Martha didn't move. Brian stepped between them, voice tight. We'll take legal action. Martha walked to the front door and opened it with deliberate calm. Cool air rolled in. She looked Brian dead in the eye. Feel free, she said, one hand on the doorknob. But not from here. Jenna's lip trembled. You're throwing us out? Martha tilted her head. You told me I was next. I agreed. I just made sure I chose where. One of the buyers stepped back into the room. Is this a bad time? Martha smiled at her. This is exactly the right time. The woman nodded and returned to the fireplace. Brian's hands balled into fists at his sides. Jenna was shaking now, blinking too fast, breathing shallow. Martha stepped aside and gestured toward the open door. Take what you brought in, she said. Leave the rest. Brian looked at the buyers, then the folder still open in his hand. Jesus, Mom. Martha didn't blink. That's Mrs. Whitaker, until further notice. Outside, the wind picked up. A wind that belonged to no one, a wind that didn't ask permission to move through things. Jenna walked out first, arms rigid. Brian followed slower, shoulders sagging under the weight of inheritance denied. Martha closed the door behind them. Then she turned to the buyers. Let me show you the sunroom, she said, voice soft. It gets golden light around 5. But in her chest, something colder pulsed. The house wasn't hers anymore. The war was, and they had just lost the first battle. The moving truck backed into the driveway just after sunrise, its diesel engine rumbling like distant thunder. The sun hadn't fully crested over the trees, but the house was already wide awake. Inside, Martha stood by the foyer with her arms folded, her breath steady and unreadable. 2 uniformed movers stepped inside, polite but efficient. Claire had arranged it all, licensed, insured, non-disclosure signed. Everything was pre-labeled, donate, keep, leave. By the fireplace, Brian hovered in sweatpants and a faded college hoodie, his face pale with disbelief. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. This house is more than just a deed. Martha didn't look up from the clipboard in her hand. You're right, she said. It was more. Then why are you gutting it like this? He asked, voice cracking. Think of the memories. I did, she said, finally meeting his eyes. That's why I'm letting them go. He looked away like she'd struck him. In the kitchen, Jenna slumped at the breakfast bar in oversized sunglasses, mascara smudged, clutching a half-drunk protein shake like it was medicine. Her phone lay face down beside her, screen black. She hadn't spoken all morning, not since they'd returned from the retreat to find their things boxed, the locks changed, and the buyers already measuring window treatments. Now she rose slowly, dragging herself into the hallway like every step cost her pride. You're ruining your own family, she said, voice brittle with exhaustion. You're tearing it all down just to prove a point. Martha handed the clipboard to the lead mover and turned to her calmly. "No," she said. "I'm restoring a boundary you tried to erase." Jenna blinked, unsure if she'd just been insulted or erased. Martha took a step closer. "You whispered that I'd be next," she said. "You were right." She leaned in, not cruel, just clear. "I went next, to peace." Jenna's throat bobbed. She turned and walked quickly into the hallway, shoulders hunched. From somewhere behind a door, something fragile broke. The movers kept going, quiet, efficient. Furniture was wrapped, loaded. Boxes labeled library and pantry. Rattain rolled into the truck. The antique sideboard, once so hotly debated, was now labeled donation shelter. By noon, the house echoed again. Not with memories, but with absence. Claire arrived at 12:30, documents in hand. She walked into the living room with her usual cool, handed Martha a manila folder, and nodded once. "This is it," she said. "Sign, and it's done." Martha sat at the now empty dining room table, her husband's old fountain pen in hand. She signed cleanly, once on each page. Claire witnessed it, then slipped the papers back into her leather briefcase. "You want to say anything else to them?" Claire asked gently. Martha looked out the window. Brian was leaning against his car, arms crossed, talking to no one. Jenna sat on the curb, phone in hand, staring at a text thread like it could unwrite the last 3 days. "No," Martha said. "I already have." She walked to the foyer, paused in the threshold, and looked back once. Just long enough to see the final box roll out, labeled Garden Tools, Keep. She turned the knob. Claire opened the front door. The light hit hard, like a verdict. Brian turned toward her one last time. "I'll call you," he said. Martha nodded, but didn't answer. Instead, she stepped outside, locking the door behind her. The click echoed. Claire turned the key over in her palm. "Do you want me to drop this at the shelter later?" "No," Martha said. "Leave it on the counter. They'll know what to do." They walked toward Claire's car. The engine was already running. Behind them, the house stood still, emptied of illusions, packed with possibility. Claire pulled away slowly, gravel crackling beneath the tires. In the side mirror, Martha saw Brian lift the folder she'd left in his sock drawer, holding it with 2 hands like it might explode. She smiled faintly. Let it. The final page inside bore no legal jargon, just her own handwriting. "Peace is not passive. It's the most deliberate thing I've ever done." 3 days after the final signatures were inked, Claire called. "They're officially out," she said over the line. And not just from the house. Martha was sitting at a small cafe 2 blocks from her new condo, maple trees outside dusted in early fall. She sipped her tea and tucked her scarf tighter around her neck. All holdings have been revised. The family trust, redirected. Brian and Jenna are no longer listed as future beneficiaries or contingent agents. Martha didn't react. And the education fund? Rewritten. It now benefits young, full-time caregivers, particularly those aged 18 to 25 caring for terminal relatives. Just like you asked, the board signed off this morning. Martha closed her eyes briefly, remembering a hospice nurse named Tasha with cracked nails and hollow cheeks. Good. And the trustee? Martha smiled faintly. "I sent him the envelope yesterday." At that very moment, Ethan Tate, her godson, stood inside a modest legal office in Raleigh, reading a letter written in Martha's own hand. The letter named him sole trustee of the Whitaker Legacy Initiative, with full discretion over all future distributions. "You were never the loudest person in the room," she had written. "That's why I trust you to lead the quiet ones out of it." Ethan pressed a palm to his chest, steadied himself, and whispered, "I won't waste it." Back in the cafe, Martha finished her tea and walked home through brisk air, her breath forming soft clouds that disappeared before anyone could hold them. Her phone rang once more that evening. Brian. She watched the screen as it buzzed. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the voicemail after it clicked over. His voice was tight, straining between disbelief and fury. "I don't know what you think you've accomplished. This wasn't justice. It was spite. Dad would have hated this. He trusted you. You've made a mockery of everything." She listened to the full message, her face unreadable, then she deleted it and blocked the number. 2 hours later, a text came through from an unknown sender. She knew the tone before she saw the name. Jenna, how could you? After everything I did for your family, everything I sacrificed, you humiliated us. Martha's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought of all the meals, the side eyes, the whispered manipulations, the silk gloves Jenna wore while tightening the noose. She went to her files, opened the scan folder, found it. The deed receipt. Signed and stamped the morning of the memorial. She attached the image to the message window, captioned it, "You warned me I was next. You just didn't realize I'd go first." Then hit send. The message delivered. No typing bubbles appeared. Martha set the phone down and opened her planner. There was still a meeting to confirm. Her notary, her accountant, and Claire would all convene next Tuesday to finalize the launch date for the new foundation website. Her name would be listed publicly, once again, but this time as founder, not wife of. She glanced at the sealed envelope sitting by the door, addressed to the last remaining bank account still bearing Brian's name. Inside, a $0.00 balance statement and a single sticky note. There is no inheritance from a house you tried to steal. Outside, the wind tugged gently at the trees. Inside, peace settled not like fog, but like architecture, built, not found. And yet the war wasn't over. Because legacy, Martha had learned, was more than money or houses. It was about who you handed the matches to, and who you let watch it burn. She folded the deed receipt back into its folder, filed it under irrevocable. Then she turned out the lights, and let the silence finally speak for her. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. Martha stepped into her new condo, smaller than the old house, but flooded with light. The windows stretched nearly floor to ceiling, framed by pale linen drapes she'd picked herself. No one had overruled her this time. No, let's go modern, or this will photograph better. Just her. And quiet. She kicked off her flats and stood in the entryway, absorbing the hush. No footsteps overhead, no distant arguments about countertops, just the hum of her own breath and the low rumble of city life, softened by distance. Her furniture, what she chose to keep, had arrived 2 days earlier. The cedar chest sat beneath the windowsill, now a bench with a quilt folded over it. The reading chair she'd fought to save from donation was stationed near a standing lamp. She'd repainted the legs herself. The kitchen was clean and warm, sun bouncing off the brushed bronze cabinet handles she installed with help from the building's handyman. There was no chore list taped to the fridge, no "we need oat milk" post-it, just a small magnet that read, "Not all storms come to disrupt your life, some come to clear your path." She made herself a cup of tea and took it out to the balcony, where Ivy climbed a trellis she'd bought at a flea market. Below, a woman walked by with a child in a red coat. The sound of laughter drifted up like perfume. Martha smiled, not because it was picturesque, but because she wasn't looking over her shoulder for permission to enjoy it. That afternoon, she walked to the library down the street and sat in on her first memoir writing group. 5 women, all different ages, all writing through loss, change, reclamation. The moderator asked what brought her there. "I've had a long life," Martha said, "but I've only recently begun to own the story." A few women nodded. One reached out and squeezed her hand under the table. On Wednesdays, she started volunteering at the community center, mostly helping women recently widowed navigate estate paperwork, bank statements, and legal tangles no one ever teaches you to expect. One woman came in sobbing, saying, "I don't even know where the mortgage bill is." Martha handed her a checklist and a peppermint. "You don't need to know everything today," she told her, "but we'll start with what you do." On Fridays, she began seeing a therapist named Carla, not to unravel what had happened, but to stitch up what remained. They talked about power and erasure, about the slow violence of condescension, about what happens when love becomes currency and affection becomes leverage. "It's a strange thing," Martha said once, "to know someone planned to outlive you so they could inherit your silence." Carla only nodded. "And now?" "Now I get to speak without asking first." That night, Martha slept with the windows cracked open. She fell asleep not thinking of locks or secrets or what needed hiding. She dreamed of soft hallways and conversations that didn't end in control. At 2:07 a.m., she stirred once, rolled to the left. No one was there, no sound from above, no scent of wine on breath not hers, just wind outside and the occasional groan of a building settling into its bones. She smiled in the dark. This was peace, not the absence of noise, but the presence of safety. In the morning, she would frame her first typed page for the memoir group. Title still pending. But the opening line was clear. I stopped being the woman in the background the moment they stopped looking for her. She rolled over. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. Steady. Waiting. Martha sat at her new desk. A clean, simple piece with wide drawers and no history attached. The title glowed at the top of the page in bold type. Whispers from the Pew, a widow's retelling. She hadn't meant for it to be poetic, it just was. That pew, front row, funeral day, cold hands folded as Jenna leaned in, had echoed in her mind for months. A pew built for reverence, used instead as a warning shot. Now it was a chapter heading. She typed slowly at first, then faster, until her fingers kept rhythm with her breath. Paragraphs stacked, sentences cut to the bone. There were no euphemisms. She didn't write like someone protecting reputations anymore. She wrote like someone who'd survived an attempted erasure. By week 4, her draft reached 60 pages. Claire read it in one night. It's not revenge, she said. It's resurrection. The local bookstore reached out after seeing a short excerpt Martha had submitted to a community journal. Would she consider speaking at their women's memoir night? She said yes. 2 weeks later, she stood behind a lectern at Whitmore Books, lit by soft sconces and surrounded by folding chairs that were quickly filled. Some faces she didn't recognize, grad students, retirees, locals drawn in by the flyer, but some she knew all too well. Angela, her old next-door neighbor, the one Jenna had whispered about being too chatty. Judith, who had once dropped off homemade cookies and was never invited in. Mina, who'd gone quiet after her own mother-in-law was moved into assisted living against her will. They were there, tucked in corners, eyes wide. Martha adjusted her glasses, looked down at her marked page, and began. My husband died on a Tuesday. The hymns were wrong, the casket was right, and the woman who married my son leaned in at his memorial and said, You're next. She paused. The air in the room stiffened. I believed her. Until I remembered who signed the deed. A few people laughed, unsure if they were allowed. Martha smiled. That was the point. She read for 15 minutes, stories of dignity repurposed, power reclaimed, silence weaponized, and then abandoned like a burden she never agreed to carry. Her voice didn't shake. It rang clear and low like the slow toll of a brass bell. When she reached the final page, she looked up. Women like me are often asked to endure quietly, to fold our grief into casseroles, to let others decide when the page turns. She scanned the room. Tears, stillness, the silence of validation. I stopped waiting for dignity, she said. I took it. For a moment the room stayed still, like the breath before thunder. Then came the applause. It started slow, then spread like flame. Not polite, not out of obligation, deafening. She didn't cry, but she did smile, wide and full, the kind that crinkled her eyes and belonged to no one else. Afterward, people lined up with dog-eared notebooks, program pamphlets, and trembling thank yous. One woman pressed a letter into her hand. I haven't left my husband yet, she whispered, but I will. Martha nodded once and didn't let go of the woman's hand until she smiled back. That night, back in her condo, she placed the event flyer on the fridge beside the quote magnet and poured herself a glass of wine. The manuscript wasn't finished, but she was becoming. Outside, a late autumn breeze rustled the trees. Inside, Martha typed one more sentence before bed. Some legacies are inherited, others are written. I've decided mine will be both. She hit save and left the screen glowing. The article ran on a Thursday. It was wedged between a city council feature and a spotlight on a youth theater program, but the headline stole the top fold. Widow turns grief into power, a story of legal precision and personal reclamation. Martha didn't expect much from it. Maybe a few nods at the market or someone recognizing her at the co-op. Instead, her inbox flooded within hours, not with press requests or gossip, but with gratitude. One woman wrote, "Your story helped me see that I'm not crazy, just tired of being erased." Another said, "My daughter made me read it. Now we're going through our finances together." Martha read every message, replied to most, forwarded some to Claire with a simple, "Told you it wasn't just about revenge." That weekend, a voicemail slipped onto her phone. No caller ID. Male voice, hesitant, formal. "Mrs. Whitaker, this is Charles Ramsey, property manager for Marigold Commons. I have Mr. Brian Whitaker listed as a lease applicant, and I was wondering if you might provide a character reference, financial preferably." She didn't return the call. The next day, Claire sent over a scanned notice. "Whitaker, Jenna Marie, petition for Chapter 7, bankruptcy." No drama, no victory dance, just a saved copy in a folder marked External Fallout. The headline of the article had been right. It wasn't about vengeance. Martha didn't burn bridges. She made them redundant. At the same time, she and Claire were finalizing something far more personal. Inside the soft-lit office with walls lined in law books and a window that overlooked the town square, Martha signed the founding papers for the Harold Whitaker Renewal Fund, a small need-based grant awarded annually to women over 60 who were seeking housing, legal aid, or basic autonomy after widowhood. The first application came from a woman named Doris, who had spent 4 decades as a trucker's wife and was now fighting to keep her trailer after his debts died with him. "She'll qualify," Claire said after scanning the file. "Easily." Martha nodded. "Let's give her the yes before the weekend. If she's like I was, Monday will feel too far away." Claire smiled. Later, while the notary packed up, Martha requested one last amendment to her will. She leaned across the desk and took the legal pad from Claire's assistant, wrote slowly, "Peace is earned, not inherited." Claire read it. Didn't ask for context, just nodded and said, "Initial it here." Bottom right. Martha signed, dated, slipped the page back into the envelope and sealed it herself. She kept a copy in her fireproof box at home. Not for drama, not even for clarity, just so no one could ever say she hadn't meant it. That night she sat on her balcony with a blanket and a book, a candle flickering beside her. Her tea had gone lukewarm, but she didn't mind. Across the way, another tenant played a jazz record. Someone laughed on a phone call. A breeze kicked through the trees and swept dry leaves across the sidewalk like they were dancing. Martha looked out at it all, still quiet, unfettered by expectation. She thought about how far dignity had once felt, how much of her life had been shaped by the myth that power must always come from proximity to men, and how none of that had survived a single signature done in black ink on a Tuesday morning. Her phone buzzed once. A text from Claire. Doris cried. "Happy tears." She said she hasn't felt seen in 10 years. Martha replied, "Tell her she's not just seen, she's remembered." Then she turned the screen face down. The wind shifted. Somewhere below, a streetlight flickered on. She pulled the blanket tighter and whispered something into the air, not for anyone else to hear, not even Claire. Just 4 quiet words, breathed like a vow. "I'm still not done." The park was quiet that morning, not deserted, just still, like the air had pressed pause. Martha parked near the elm-lined path and stepped out slowly, the gravel under her flats crisp with early frost. A gray scarf coiled around her neck, and her coat was the color of ash. Elegant, worn, chosen. She carried no flowers, just a small envelope tucked inside her coat pocket, worn soft from being opened and refolded across the year. The bench was where she'd asked them to place it, under the largest sycamore, the one with a split in its bark that looked like a lightning scar. It faced the pond, where ducks drifted in silence and geese flew overhead in ragged lines. The plaque read simply, "In loving memory of Harold Whitaker, husband, father, listener." She sat down gently, hands resting in her lap. No camera, no ceremony, just breath and wood and the sound of water not needing an audience. Martha unfolded the note. It wasn't from Harold. It was to him. Written in the early months, before the house sale, before the voice recordings, and the night she'd slept through without waking in dread. She'd written it after finding the post-nup, hands shaking, heart steadier than it had been in years. It read, "You never needed anyone's permission to exist. Neither did I. I just forgot that for a while. I remember now." She read it silently, then out loud, then folded it again and slid it beneath the bench slats. Let the wind decide what happened next. She sat for a long time, letting the cold touch her face, soft and without force. A soft sniff broke the quiet. Martha turned. A young woman sat at the far end of the bench. 20? Maybe 22. Hoodie pulled tight around her face. Knees hugged to her chest. She wasn't trying to cry quietly. She just hadn't expected to be seen. Martha waited, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small ivory card, one of the dozen she kept now. Not business cards, something closer to lifelines. She extended it gently. The girl hesitated, then took it. On the front it read, "Harold Whitaker Renewal Fund, Legal and Housing Help for Women in Transition." Below that, in soft blue, ink, "Call if you need out. Ask for Claire or Martha." The girls stared at it like it was something sacred, or something dangerous. Martha said only, "You don't owe anyone another year." She stood, let her hand rest briefly on the girl's shoulder, then walked back to the path. Her steps were steady, her lungs open. She didn't look back. At the car she paused and glanced toward the trees. No ghosts, no weight. The past wasn't following her. It was rooted now, in benches and court filings, in grants and memoir pages, in choices she'd made with full breath and no apology. She opened the door, sat in the driver's seat, let the warmth fill the cabin, then stared at her own reflection in the rearview mirror. No more whispered threats, no more stolen rooms, no more waiting her turn in stories she built. She whispered one last thing to herself before turning the key. "I end it here." And for the first time in her life, the whisper wasn't for safety. It was a declaration, the kind that needed no echo,